the rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains. Haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up. Fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah. Cause this is my road. Lights, camera, action, I'm ready to go. I'm never gonna give up. Fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah. Yeah, this is my road. Lights, camera, action, I'm ready to go.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHH LP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Good morning, everyone. Again, Harry, thank you so much. This is the Tom Ficklin Show, and Jesse Turner is here with me, one of my sidekicks, and this is Jesse's third or fourth appearance on the show. I'm really glad to have him. Jesse is a professor of literacy, elementary, and early childhood education at Central Connecticut State University. We're blessed to have from a call-in with Julian Heilig. Julian is professor of educational leadership and policy studies, and also director of the doctorate in education leadership at the California State University in Sacramento, California. Also chair of the NAACP education committee, if you will. And it's such a pleasure to kind of have Jesse here in the studio and Julian on the line, because we hear about education and educational reform and Plessy v. Ferguson and Brown versus Board of Education and Sheff versus O'Neill and other matters. So we hear these buzzwords and these themes and these legal interventions, but where are we in 2018 in terms of educational equity and policy and revenue stream kind of fairness and just justice in general? And so we've had this theme on the show for a while, and Julian's going to kind of chat with us. Julian's really well known in the community. I looked at his website, and he's a blogger, and he's done TED Talks and really a foremost speaker. And Jesse's been kind enough to kind of introduce me to Julian. And so we're going to bring the topic home of what does it mean to have a fair and just and civil society, using our educational apparatus as kind of the conduit, and the controversies involved in that regard. So Jesse, good morning.
Good morning, Tom. Good morning, Julian.
Julian, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
From California.
Good. Thank you
great.
And we apologize for you. It's what, 7 o'clock? What time is it out there in California now?
I think I'm going to be around 4 a.m.
4 a.m. Okay. Okay. That's Julian time. And this is the Julian time show. So it's early, and we appreciate your calling in at whatever hour it might be. As we know, in Australia, it's tomorrow. So this whole time thing is even a relative statement. And education is somewhat relative, but also contentious. Julian, right. Kick us off. You guys have known each other for a while, but I don't want to belabor the point. We have about 45 minutes to kind of chat about and have you share with us what you've been up to, your passion and purpose, but also, as I kind of indicated prior, some of the things you want people to either know about, contribute to, share, help. How do we promote the show? Is with no apologies. The Tom Ficklin Show is designed to kind of inspire and be a catalytic agent. And if I get arrested, I'm sure you'll come at some point, maybe be a character witness for me. We don't know each other, but hopefully after the next 45 minutes, you'll get to know me enough. So it's an uncensored show, and it's your show. And Jesse has been kind enough to introduce me to you in a way, and it's been I feel like a heartwarming kind of feeling already. So Julian, good morning, and kind of kick us off about why you got up this morning and took your precious time to kind of share with our listeners what you're involved with.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for having me on your show. Just so glad to join your listeners there in New Haven and other places, across the globe. So what I do is, I am a professor, an academic, who is really interested in social justice and equality for students of color in their communities across the United States. I think, the real challenge that we have, of course, you talked, at the kickoff of the conversation about some of the Supreme Court cases, Plessy v. Ferguson and Brown v. Board. The real challenge in our society, that elephant in the room, whether it be be Hartford, whether it be New Haven, it doesn't really matter what city it is in the United States. You don't have to go to Finland to see, or Singapore or Korea to see a high quality education and what we should be offering children in their neighborhood schools. All you have to do is go across the river, across the highway, on the other side of town, the other side of the tracks, so to say. Because when the wealthy have challenges with education for their children, what they do is they throw money at that. And what our society is not willing to do is spend the resources necessary for the various gold standards that we have in the research literature that are well established over time. We're just not willing to do that for poor children. And so what we've been doing over the last 2 decades or so is toying with education reform, which is really just 2 words that represent something else. Privatization of public education. How do we profit off the backs of poor Black and brown children? And so I think that's what wakes me up in the morning, is how do we make sure that every single child in the United States, and not just the wealthy, have the opportunity to have a high quality education.
So Julian, not to put words in your mouth, but do I hear you saying that the plight of disparities, that some people are still benefiting from this plight and maybe even trying to continue the disparity so that they can continue to profit? I'm not. That's kind of my summary statement, but I want you to clarify, sure, or if that's on target.
Yeah, I think that's right on the money. And the way I talk about it is, why solve social problems when you can monetize them? Why address the challenges in our society when you can monetize those problems? I'm going to give you one example. One example that's highly contentious in Connecticut and many other places, and that's charter schools. So the NAACP, after the resolution was passed at the National Convention, calling for a moratorium on charter schools until transparency and accountability laws were enacted. And that's the key piece that a lot of folks, they talk about the NAACP's position on charter schools. And it wasn't actually the first position that the NAACP took on charter schools. In 2004, the NAACP passed a resolution equating charter schools with the privatization of education. Mm-hmm. That resolution didn't get as much visibility in the national press as the 2016 resolution calling for a moratorium. But that was the 3rd or 4th resolution about charter schools in the last couple of years. So if you had been paying attention to what the NAACP has been working on over the last several years, then it probably wouldn't have it wouldn't have been a big surprise that had happened. And the challenge with charter schools is that if you look at the research broadly across the United States and locally, what you'll see is that charter schools actually take the problems that we have in our neighborhood public schools, mm-hmm, and make them worse. Make them worse. So charter schools, on average, are more segregated. Charter schools, on average, are more likely to suspend Black and brown children, especially males. Charter schools, if you go online, every single day you're going to find out about financial malfeasance in the charter school sector. For example, the Gulen charter schools, which is actually the 2nd largest network of charter schools run by an imam from Turkey.
What's
Gulen,
the name of it again?
Charter school closest. So the 2nd largest network of charter schools is run by an imam that collaborated with the CIA and is now sequestered in Pennsylvania. I know, sounds like James Bond, but mm-hmm, this is a true story. Well, the Gulen school closest to my home actually went through a scandal, and there's scandals all over the place. If you just look up Gulen charter schools on Google, it'll blow your mind that this has been going on under your nose. The principal embezzled money and then escaped the country back to Turkey, where he was from, just within the last couple of weeks. So the FBI has raided the Gulen charter schools in Louisiana and other states for a variety of different types of alleged malfeasance. So, and actually the California NAACP called for a moratorium specifically for the Gulen-affiliated charter schools. So the reason why I mention that is because the financial malfeasance is even worse in the charter sector. And so that's not to say that there aren't some great charter schools. And I say this as, 10 years ago, I was a charter school parent. I worked at a charter school. I'm on the charter school board. I donated to a charter school. But
so you saw the
ago,
light. You saw the light, huh, Jules?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean,
all right.
10 years ago there was 2,000 charter schools. Now there's 6,000. And so what's happened over the last 10 years is that they've evolved. There, a lot of times I'll get calls from community-based charters that say, I have an African American focused curriculum, or I have a Native American focused curriculum. I just had a conversation like this with a charter school from Los Angeles, and so the two questions I asked is, okay, well, if you want our support, then let's see your books.
Mm-hmm.
How are you spending your money? What does your curriculum look like? Because they were trying to get reapproved by LA Unified, but they weren't willing to provide that information.
The Los Angeles Unified School System?
Right. So Los Angeles Unified, in California, the way charter school authorization works, and this is something else, when we're talking about accountability and transparency for taxpayer dollars, which makes a lot of sense, but many charter schools are just not willing to be transparent and accountable, and there's some that are. But this particular charter school wasn't willing to follow the rules. So in California, the way it works is if you want a charter school, and it works differently in different states, which is another issue. It's the wild, wild west out there. Let's say you want candy. Okay, let's say your kids want candy, and goes to mom and says, "Mom, can I have some candy?" Mom says no. Okay, that's the district authorization. Then you go to dad and you say, "Dad, I'd like some candy." Dad says no. So that's the county authorization level, the second level. Well, then what do? You go ask your neighbor for candy, which is the State Board of Education out there. So what we really got to do, and I think charter school folks need to acknowledge this, is that if we don't deal with the segregation issues, with these school discipline issues, with these financial malfeasance, then ultimately charter schools, the tide is going to turn against them. And I think that's what's really happening. They're less popular. They become more partisan. Democrats are now less likely to support charter schools because of the lack of transparency and accountability. So this is just one example. I mean, there's many others of how education reform has sought to privately control and privately manage and take democracy out of what's happening in our schools.
Again, you're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show, and Julian Heilig is with us, and also via call-in from Sacramento, California. By the way, Julian, do you live actually in Sacramento proper or in the outskirts?
Well, I basically live on airplanes nowadays.
So when you land, when you touch down on terra firma, where do you live?
Yeah, I actually live here in Sacramento.
Perfect.
I've been at Cal State for 5 years now. Before that, I was at UT Austin, tenured there in their ed policy department for 8 years. So, but Sacramento is my home base. This week I'm going to be in Fort Myers. I'm going to be in Cleveland. I just did 2 trips to DC last week.
Yes, I saw on your blog, and definitely we'll put some of the notations of how people can follow you. And again, you're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show, and Jesse Turner is here in the studio with me from Central Connecticut State University, and Julian Heilig's on the line. Julian, for folks that might be tuning in and might only have 30 seconds to kind of hear from you, what would you like them to do, to think about, to contribute to how can people weigh in from an individual and or collective basis?
Well, I think the first thing is to get informed, because I think only recently has the media really become critical of what's happening with education reform, and then second, presented alternatives. So the first is read Cloaking Inequity. I just reached 1 million readers
on your blog.
Couple of weeks.
1 million?
That's my blog.
Okay.
1 million readers, 200 countries around the world.
So it's global.
It's a global blog. I never expected it to be global. I started it, I was on faculty in African American Studies, concurrently appointed when I was at UT Austin, and they had a social media training, and they turned me on to blogging, and then I guess 6 years later, the rest is history. So check out the blog. Also read Diane Ravitch's blog, who's one of the professor at NYU and one of the leading proponents for conversations about education reform. Check out my Twitter, Professor JVH. And then finally, what to do. I was in Connecticut, in Hartford, actually, not too long ago.
Okay.
Meeting with various community organizations, and that's focusing on community-based reform that's driven by coalitions within the community. For every education reform or option that is about privatization and private control, there's an alternative approach that's community-based, whether it be assessment of teacher quality, assessment of student achievement, whether it be provision of teachers in your community instead of Teach for America, which sends untrained teachers that have only had a summer of training, sometimes only 18 hours in the classroom. There are community-based options where you create collaborations with universities to create pipelines into your community and to retain those teachers. So for every educational reform option out there, there's a community-based reform alternative.
Tremendous. And Julian, we want to bring Jesse into the discussion here for a moment as well. But just before I do, given your travels in the various cities and you're speaking at various conferences and educational workshops, and you're being kind of the mentor and the guru for folks that are pursuing their doctorate. What cities, where have you seen some examples of things that could be scaled up, or some interventions or community collaborations or specific community initiatives where change has happened or where policies have changed? Can you drop a few anecdotes on us, maybe sure, from various cities where you've seen some successes?
Sure, of course, we can do that. So first, let me just say, we had the California NAACP convention last week, and I was fortunate enough to take our president and CEO, Derek Johnson.
Derek Johnson, yes.
He gave a keynote to the airport. Now, my state president said, Julian, can you take Derek to the airport? I said, sure. What time, Ms. Huffman? Alice Huffman's our president. She said, 3 a.m. And I said, yes, I can do that, Ms. Huffman. Whatever you tell me to do, I'm going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I was taking him to the airport, and, he said, Julian, what we really need to be able to do is find schools and districts that are willing to do this community-based reforms that we know work at scale.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of our big challenges, right? Because we have piecemeal across the United States.
Yes.
We can point to different places that are doing exciting things. So, for example, we know that pre-K is one that gives you one of the biggest bangs for your buck in terms of student success over the long term.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of those sort of gold standards. And let me be a professor for a minute. Almost a quarter of a standard deviation up to a standard deviation, which is a big effect size. That's me being a professor for a second. There are places like San Antonio that are making big investments in pre-K. Then you have places like Miami, where what they've said is, look, we want to give every parent a choice of a magnet school, a choice of a high-quality neighborhood school. So Superintendent Carvalho has done that. You see Latino achievement in a large district, and Miami spans all different types of localities.
Yes.
Believe it or not, there's rural, urban, suburban. That is a huge district. And so Miami's been knocking out the park, especially in terms of Latino student achievement. Of course, we know many Puerto Ricans and Latinos there in Connecticut. So, that's another example. One of the big sort of broad-based examples is out here in California. We've been closing the achievement gap and increasing our graduation rates and reducing suspensions. And we've done that with a statewide policy. We're always talking about New Orleans and these other places. Those are the places educational reformers want to talk about because they've charterized them. For example, New Orleans, the only choice is a charter school. They basically closed or changed all of the neighborhood public schools to be charter schools. So I don't see how that's really a choice. If you go to dinner and they say, would you like steak, or steak? And you say, well, I guess I'll have steak. That's not really a choice, right? So in California, what we're doing is community-based accountability. So, for example, what you do is you create a strategic plan. It's called a local control accountability plan, where communities have to strategically spend funds for foster kids, low SES kids, and immigrant kids. So, for example, in LA, the strategic plan that the community designs is worth $1 billion.
$1 billion.
And so there's $1 billion that the community has drawn up a strategic plan. And Jerry Brown fully funded this local approach to accountability this last legislative session.
Your current Jerry Brown, your current governor?
Yeah. Tomorrow there's an election between Cox and Newsom.
Yes.
And I suspect, because Jerry Brown is termed out, I suspect that you'll see a more progressive vision. We've been working on this behind the scenes. I suspect you see a more progressive vision for education in California. But
so you're predicting that Newsom will win?
Well, I hope so.
Okay, I mean, you're voting for Newsom.
Pardon?
You're voting for Newsom.
Oh, of course. I even tweeted out my vote yesterday.
Okay. Julian,
So,
let me. You referenced early childhood education, and it occurs to me that we have a gentleman in front of me that has had some experience in that regard. He even has part of those words with his job title. So Jesse, would you want to chime in about the importance of impacting early childhood education?
Sure. I'm the associate editor of the New England Reading Association Journal, and Helen Abadiano and I have written on this very topic, and we have looked at the literature to review early childhood. Just like Julian said, it's got the bang for the buck. Well, it's not only got the bang to the buck, it's got the longitudinal studies, 45 years, 50 years of quality early childhood education means that you're less likely to be in jail. You're less likely to need any kind of assistance, to be depressed, to be in poor health. A quality early childhood education is a door to home ownership, prosperity. We know that, and that's in the data. And when I look at this, because I'm a little different, I look at the education reform of this country, and I'm the Moral Mondays education ambassador for Connecticut. And we would look at it and say, this is a white supremacy wet dream. Making poor schools compete against each other for limited resources while you are giving extra funding to your most wealthy schools. I mean, we look at it and we say, hey, 170 years of inequity in our public schools. When has there ever been equity for black, brown, poor, or special education children in this country? Never. So at that point, it's like tomorrow when we go to the polls, I'm voting. Right there with you, Julian.
Again, you're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show. It's such a pleasure to have Julian Heilig on the line and Jesse Turner here in the studio with me. You're listening to WNHH, and this is the Tom Ficklin Show. Every Monday morning we come to you. Julian, fast forward. If I had you back on the air in a year, what kind of progress or incidents, or in terms of your visions and your dreams about what might be occurring in the nation, and also you have the connection with other countries. What if I had you back on the show in about 12 months, 14 months? What might you be able to point to as what's been working? How people have got involved, how people have been mobilized. I always like to kind of inspire this show for us to manifest our visions and dreams and lift them up in voice, and then we kind of put them into action.
Well, first of all, I hope that Betsy DeVos is out of a job.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be my first hope. And Donald Trump too, if we're daydreaming here.
Well, not yet. Yes, definitely, but proactively daydreaming and kind of manifesting ourselves and gearing up and girding our loins for the future.
Yeah. So the reason why I say that is because Donald Trump during his election promised to spend $20 billion on school choice privatization. So, and if you are keeping up with their agenda, that's the direction the feds have been heading. So I think that what I would hope for would be that, states other than California would be investing in a community-based education policy agenda, whether it be provision of high-quality teachers. We know, for example, in poor communities, you're more likely to have teachers who are underqualified and unqualified, that we'd be paying attention to the school-to-prison pipeline, and that we wouldn't see black boys and brown boys and black girls and brown girls more likely to be suspended, especially discretionary suspension from school, that we'd be more likely to see equality in funding of schools on both sides of the highway, both sides of the tracks, so to say. That we would see more collaboration between and partnerships between universities, especially HBCUs and MSIs. So those are historically black colleges and universities and minority-serving institutions, to ensure that those teachers are going into communities where they are traditionally high levels of attrition, and then have the environment so that they'd want to stay. We actually graduate enough high-quality teachers. The problem is that when they get to communities, they're poorly paid, the profession's not respected, and they're not likely to stay, especially in communities serving low-income families. So I think that a community-based vision on all of these fronts, if we can make some progress over the next year, then we'll see the results that No Child Left Behind and never delivered, which is students more likely to go to college, students more likely to complete career programs, students less likely to drop out, less likely to be suspended. Those are all the things that were promised by George W. Bush and my former boss, Rod Page, when No Child Left Behind came into being back in 2001. Those things never happened by 2014. So it's time for us to think about how we do this in a community-based way, how we use community-based alternative approaches to the privatization and private control that education reformers have been espousing for the last couple of decades.
Perfect. And you're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show, and Julian Heilig is on the line, and Jesse Turner is with us. Jesse, you've mentioned kind of just before we came in that some of the upcoming Moral Monday events, the salons you mentioned, and it seems to me that some of these the things that and initiatives that Julian has mentioned might be incorporated in some of these salons that you're kind of rolling out throughout the state.
Sure. Moral Mondays has an educational equity salon next week, and we're calling it White Supremacy or Education Reform. And it will be at 10 Constitutional Place. It's free. We'll feed you. The parking is free. Come down at 5 o'clock. It's Veterans Day. And we got a group of teachers and parents and communities. And we have Robert Codall, who was a former Harvard board member. We have Michelle McKnight, which is a fantastic young black math teacher in Manchester who talks about social justice mathematics. You're going to love her. You got to come down. But shouldn't we be looking at something? When I'm going to Harvard next week, what's the problem? The mayor appoints the majority of the board. When I go to Chicago, what's the problem? When I say to G2, who appoints the board? He says the mayor. When I go to Boston, who appoints the board? The mayor. The mayor, the mayor, the mayor. So when I'm looking at this, how come democracy in black and brown communities is not a good thing? Could you imagine going to Darien and say, oh, you don't need to have an elected board anymore. How about Simsbury? No, you don't get an elected board of education. We'll let the mayor take care of it. This is the stuff that we're talking about. $1 trillion was spent on No Child Left Behind. $1 trillion, and I'm wondering where it is.
Julian, kind of a trick question, but also an opportunity for you. Any questions for Jesse or myself? I mean, we've just met, but you know, Jesse Walking Man Turner's been on this parade and this sojourn and this commitment to equity for a while. But I'll flip the script. From your Sacramento standpoint, any questions for us that we can maybe respond to?
Well, I think there's a question for you, and really a question for your listeners. At the NAACP state convention last week, we challenged the folks in our education sessions to make a commitment what you're going to do for education and social justice and equity each week for the next year. And so the question is, are we willing to do that? Are we willing to make a commitment to commit to some action every single week for the next year, right? Are we willing to make a commitment to ask our friends and neighbors to vote for the right people? Are we willing to make a commitment that when the Network for Public Education, which is a nonprofit whose board I serve on, are you willing to commit to be involved with the Network for Public Education, receive their emails, and when there's action alerts to email your senators or email your congressman? Are you willing to do that? So it's really a question of are you and your listeners willing to make that commitment?
That's profound. Scott Esdale, as you probably know, is our state NAACP president, and Scott's also on the national board. I'm sure you guys have connected, and I'll certainly pass it on to him and follow up with Scott in terms of what
we've had some interesting conversations in the past. Yes,
what he's launching. And Dory Dumas is our president here in New Haven. I think Hartford NAACP is just undergoing an election, but I know many of the presidents in New London and Stamford and Bridgeport, and I'll certainly reach out to them as well and begin to kind of see what we can do from a collective and individual branch standpoint. Again, you're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show, and Jesse, kind of weigh in. Every time that you're the sidekick here for me, there's so much going on that you've been involved with, but I'm sure our listeners would be interested in some of your thoughts in terms of what's transpired thus far this morning.
So, if I thought about that question, what would I want to see next year? I'll give you an example of what the New Britain NAACP and the Ebenezer Bassett committee what we're working on in New Britain. In Connecticut, not one government building is named after a prominent African American in our state. And we have Ebenezer Juan Carlos Bassett, the first black graduate of a public institution in the state, my school, Central Connecticut State University, in 1853. Thinking about it, think about being the only black person graduating with honors, becoming the first black ambassador to Hispaniola, becoming a humanitarian hero where he saved thousands of lives in Hispaniola when Ulysses Grant told him, don't let any more people into the compound. And he said, well, yeah, I'll be thinking about it, while he was letting people in. But Ebenezer Bassett is a reform educator, the real true reform. In New Haven, schools started. I think it's Allegheny College becomes one of the first historic black colleges in Philadelphia, a leading contemporary of Frederick Douglass. And our president said, we want to build a name after Ebenezer Bassett last year. And we're waiting. It's at the Board of Education. So just in case people, you're bored, I think it's November 28th, we are going to the BOR. And they tell us we can't talk, but we're going to have signs, and we're going to say it's time for an Ebenezer Bassett building. But in a state where you can't even name a building after one of the most prominent historical black figures, not only in your state, in the nation, something's wrong.
Jesse, thanks for hearing that. And I believe if in the next few weeks, we'll devote a show to this topic and maybe be able to report out that something's been finalized or at least committed to as we move forward. Julian, as we kind of wind down, we have another 10 minutes or so, and really appreciate your calling in. What were the thoughts when I looked at your resume and your blog and your speaking and if people just Google your name in terms of your YouTube talks? You've been on this battlefield for a while, and you mentioned working in Houston and kind of discovering what was going on there, and then Rod Page, when Rod became Secretary of Education, you mentioned kind of hopefully how we'll hope that some people are deposed, i.e. DeVos, and hopefully at some point this 145th imposter. But what goes through your mind in terms of keeping you inspired in this regard? Because I know sometimes you probably get depressed or feel frustrated, and how do you kind of keep yourself motivated and inspired and to inspire others?
That's a good question. I think it's important. Sometimes folks who are activated, you can get discouraged that you don't see change, immediate change. But I think you see incremental change. I think the things that give me hope is that there are localities out there that are making progress. I was talking about the community-based accountability work out here in California. It's called the Local Control Funding Formula and the Local Control Accountability Plans. And the story I think that I'll tell quickly, because one person can make a difference. I went to an academic conference in Europe, in Rome specifically. It was an accountability conference. It was 2012. And at the time, people were talking about how great No Child Left Behind was, and that every country in the world should copy us. I mean, this was the actual conversation at the time. And I thought to myself, I was presenting research where communities, parents and teachers and students were talking about how accountability, No Child Left Behind had been problematic in Texas. On the plane back, I was thinking about we need a new idea that's community-driven, that includes accountability, that has multiple measures, and that includes a carrot, extra funding for these priorities. So I put a work group together when I got back to Texas of professors and students, and we came up with a set of principles, and we took it over to the Texas legislature. And unfortunately, Texas, Austin, is the place where good ideas go to die. It's a very Republican-controlled state. But I gave that work to Linda Darling Hammond out here in California. And Linda gave it to the right people, and that work group that became what is now known as the Local Control Accountability Plans for the entire state of California. So one person and one idea, getting together a group of like-minded people who are really focused and communicating that work, that approach to people in power can actually change the conversation about education policy. So that work that we did, there was 10 of us in that room, became became policy for the entire state of California. So one person can make a difference, I think. When you get discouraged because the needle's not moving fast enough, the national data, the latest thing in your local community that's discouraging, it's about getting together with your neighbors, getting together with local civil rights organizations, with teachers associations, because you can make change. We can't be discouraged. There's a Public Enemy song from back in the day. I'm a hip hop head.
Don't get Jesse started on the Public. See, now, go
Public
ahead.
Enemy. And the song is "Don't Give Up the Fight."
Don't give up the fight.
Yeah.
Jesse, you want to sing it for us for a little bit?
Well, I was going to say, guard your grill, fight the power. Definitely. Julian, we had talked a little bit on via Facebook, and we've been talking about on the East Coast, Ricardo Rosa from Dartmouth, Massachusetts, Mark Nason, Jamal Bowman, principal in the Bronx, Luis Torres, principals in the Bronx, and others. And we've been talking about having an educational reform summit in the state of Connecticut. And I think you said if we could come up with some travel money and we could give you a little honoraria, you would come. And I think what a perfect talk would be is on that community education reform stuff that you were talking about. Wow, you would make you would be a dream come true keynoter for us. Just want to hold you to it.
Yeah, no, I'm willing to do that. I'm on the road a lot, but this is the most important work is how do we find ways to communicate to power the alternative ideas. Charter schools and privatization are not the only way. And so what we have to do is we have to take the research so that communities can weaponize it in their locales. And that's real important because, for example, in New Orleans, we wrote a policy brief about what was happening there. And it was really important for me because of the context. I feel like there's this colonization of education reform. And you have all these outsiders coming in to tell you what you should do in your community. So I'm real sensitive to that. So when I was in Hartford and other places, I'm coming to listen and be a resource and be a conduit. The key is that communities have to design their own education policy reform approaches, and then enact those political coalitions to make those happen. Because otherwise, then we're using the same colonizing approach that education reformers use. So I'm all for it. I'm ready to come listen.
Good. And allies are so important across the board, and people of the same mindset. As Jesse and Julian, as you guys have been talking, my mind's been going back and forth to Brownsville, and 1968 in terms of community control. And Jesse, you want to weigh in on that?
What Julian was talking about there. The American educational system is unique. All around the world, it was a nationalized system. We were the system that developed town by town, hamlet by hamlet, village by village, city by city, state by state. And what Julian's talking about is local control, listening to the community, community-based education. And when I look at the reforms that have been pushed in this country, not only by George Bush, but let me be honest with you, Arnie Duncan raced to the top over there. What do I see? The elimination of local control. Hey, you're a black and brown community, you're poor, well, you don't deserve to elect your board of ed. So the very nature of being in a republic is to protect individual rights and minority rights. And what I say is I'm charging the United States of America, federal policy and state policies with violating the community rights of its minority groups. I'm charging them. Hey, you stand up to it, Mr. President. Stand up to it, Secretary DuBois. Stand up to it, governors. Stand up to it, commissioners of education. I have laid the charge before you.
Jesse, thanks for sharing that. Julian, just as we wind up wind up for the next 5 minutes or so, I want to jump for a second to you're working with graduate students pursuing their doctorate, and that intrigues me. That I'm not sure how old you are, but you're not going to live forever. I'm not going to live forever. What's on the mind of some of your younger students pursuing doctorates in terms of the areas that they want to research or have an impact on, or I guess wonder whether how you see that going in terms of the new Julians and the new Jessies that we're kind of manufacturing and producing in the academic arena.
Yeah, that's funny. Linda Darling Hammond, who's a prominent Stanford professor, is who trained me. And the other day, she sent me a picture of her grandkid. Her grandkid dressed up as Thurgood Marshall for Halloween. And so I responded by sending her a picture of my two students. One of those students is a black principal here in Sacramento, and the other is a young Muslim woman. And I told her, I said, look, these are your academic grandchildren too. So I think, we're creating the leaders for Northern California, for the state of California, and farther afield. Not only do we have a teacher quality, a shortage of high quality teachers, but we have a shortage of high quality leaders. I think one of the biggest issues we have is that the education reformers have figured this out, and what they're doing is they have the Broad Academy and new leaders for new schools. They have this whole set of organizations where they're creating groups of superintendents, assistant superintendents, nonprofit leaders to run these organizations with their privatization and private control ideology. So if you hire Broad, Eli Broad is a investor in real estate out in LA, and he runs this Broad Academy. If you hire one of those Broad Academies as your superintendent, he's going to turn over your district to charter schools, he or she, as quickly as they possibly can, whether it be Atlanta or in any other city. That's their modus operandi. So it's important for us to train leaders who have this community-based vision, who are critical policy analysts, and who are transformative leaders, because there is quite a big difference between the folks that the education reformers are training to lead our organizations and our empirically informed leaders that we're creating in California State and elsewhere.
Julian, just as we wind up, I believe Linda was here a few weeks ago. Didn't she just publish a book, and she had a researcher to assist her on the benefits and the outcomes of the Comer school development I think Linda was here. There was a celebration of Jim Comer and his school development program, and Linda was here, I believe, a few weeks ago. Sure.
Well, okay, so Linda's published about 30 books.
Oh, yeah, about 30. So this is one of the most recent. Yeah.
I haven't read that particular book, but of course the Comer schools are well known.
So that's perfect. So she was here. There was a 50th celebration of Jim's initiatives, and Linda was here for 2 days. So I'm glad you lifted up her name.
Well, I saw Linda in D.C. last week. I spoke at the Learning Policy Institute forum on school choice in D.C. last week. And I told her, this is just a side point. I said, Linda, how do you do this? You're the only person I know that travels more than me. How do you do this? And she said, she said, I do it for the children.
Do it for the children.
So yes. So the Comer School, the idea of wraparound services, this is another community-based approach. That is, kids in poverty, it's not poverty that causes low test scores. It's what happens to kids in poverty, the lack of nutrition, the lack of continuity in schooling, homelessness, et cetera. And so the wraparound approach to schools and community schools specifically, which is a specific approach, a specific alternative to charter schools, to community schools approach, which is really an outgrowth of what happened with the Comer schools over time. There's a strong base of research that community schools and wraparound approaches is one of the best things we can do for kids in poor communities.
Tremendous. So, Jesse, we have about 30 seconds, so I want to give you your last word, and then Julian, really appreciating last words you'd like to share as well. Jesse?
Teachers, I want you to lead with love. I want you to practice a pedagogy of love. You are not hopeless. You are not alone. Show a smile. Pat a child on the back. Lift them up today. Do something positive today for just one child in your classroom. And I promise you from the deepest part of my heart, you are making a difference. So do not neglect the duty to lead with empathy, humanity, dignity, and love in your classroom.
Tremendous. Julian?
We must give students what they need in their local schools. They must be safe. They must be well fed. And I think that's the key pieces, is that we just need to give students what they need in their community, and we have to have the political willpower to do so.
Tremendous, tremendous. Gentlemen, thank you. Julian, thank you so much. Hope to get you here on the East Coast, or hopefully we may even see you in one of your sojourns, or where you touch down throughout the United States. And again, we'll share with people how they can reach you and your blog, and just really appreciate your spending the time and sharing with us your passion and your purpose and your collective product. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Jesse, thank you as well.
You're welcome.
Everyone,
thank you, Julian.
We'll talk to you next Monday. And again, this is the Tom Ficklin Show, and really hope you've enjoyed it. I know I have, and I know Jesse has, and Julian. Julian will send you the check. So be on the lookout.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Cause this is my road, let's camera action, I'm ready to go. I'm never gonna give up, fall down, I just gotta get up, hey. Yeah, this is my road, let's camera action, I'm ready to go. Way too long, we faced them storms, now you gon' face the dawn you waited for. I said from night to dawn, I right my wrongs alone, in competition with warnings.